the people closest to the problem are closest to the solution. Thank you. So what I was thinking I was going to do is repeat for the microphone. And me and Mary can maybe share this one.
Oh, you're right. Okay. So basically, I said that I think Black queer feminism exists as a framework, but also an ideology. So something that you can live by, but also something that you can study and build upon and use and practice. So for a multitude of things. That's what I said. Who's next? Behind you? Behind me? Okay.
Hi, sorry, during late. I'm Gerald. I use she, her pronouns. I'm with If When How, Lawyering for Reproductive Justice. Hi. And for me, I think one of the important parts about Black queer feminism is that it is a critique of our systems. It includes analysis, a racial analysis. It includes a critique of heteronormativity. It includes a critique of our systems that are in place that put up barriers and put up oppression. So it's not just focused on individuals, but it's focused on the larger systematic barriers that are in place.
Thank you. Any more thoughts, y'all? This is really generative.
Yeah, do what you gotta do. If we're creating our own definition of it too, I feel like there's room to add more fluidity to it. And you were kind of, saying that as well. I think that in the traditional sense, sometimes it doesn't include or see the interconnectedness of other liberation movements, especially like trans liberation movements. And so I think for us, Black queer feminism can include thinking about and critiquing the systems that oppress certain communities that are often left out of conversations. That's all I'll say. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think all of that. I also, because I have so much of my work as a queer person in my community with my child who's also queer and also in academia, I'm on two tracks. There's the Black feminisms, the Black queer feminism that comes out of the academy, which is abstracted from lived realities of people and often doesn't have a lot of utility for the people who are trying to survive and thrive. So there's that definition. And then there's the way, and it is a framework, it's also a way of living and being in community and supporting. And it's also a critique, but it's also a reclamation and a revaluing of what Black queer folks are in the communities that they have organically proliferated to not just survive and be safe, but to be beyond that and be amazing and wonderful and all those things. So I try to think of it holistically and comprehensively, but the one that I'm operating off of is a definition that is attendant to the particulars of the lived experience of Black queer folks and all of the insidious ways in which those identities position someone to be choked by the system and literally killed, but also it's not just a framework of negation, it's also a framework of life and vitality and generation, like positive generation. So sometimes that's always missing from the definitions that I'm given in the academy too, right? This sort of defining ourselves as negation. It's always what we aren't or what we're marginalized or this or that. And I always want to bring back in what I know as the sort of generative life-giving stuff that comes from Black queer spaces too.
Ooh, y'all are doing the damn thing. I also want to say, I think we've been able to figure out Andrea, who I was texting with. Andrea, you want to introduce
here.
yourself?
I'm here. Can y'all hear me?
Oh,
No.
perhaps not. It's,
No. All right. I think we just.
yes, please feel free to come join the circle. I know there's some food happening, so no pressure, but we can also have food in the circle, whatever your comfort. And here's some space over here as well. I don't know, because she was saying she was able to hear it and that she thinks they fixed the sound, but now I don't see her. She wants to give up. Let's just call her in. Yeah. Let's do that. We're having some tech challenges, so I just texted Andrew to say, can we just call you? I got a microphone and a speaker. That's right. I just love what has been said. You know, like I was introduced to Black feminism 20 years ago, maybe, like as like something that was like a life raft in many ways. And in the last maybe 10 years, BQF as a framework. And also queer, not as an identity, but queer as a politic. So like and that's how I think of Black queer feminism as simultaneously, I am a Black queer feminist, but more importantly than my identity, I have a Black queer feminist politic, you know, because like the politic is what our elders and ancestors, like in the Combahee River Collective we're talking about. And, you know, not just I am, and therefore I have this politic. No, I have this politic that is informed in these lived realities. And that's so for me, not just Black queer feminists can have a Black queer feminist politic. I think everybody needs to have a Black queer feminist politic if we say we're doing liberation work. And if you don't, I would like to hear what that means and why.
Yeah. I think, and I've certainly appreciated everything that folks have spoken to this shared definition. And one of the things that always grounds me in the politic, and I think before I like really understood the language, I got taught about the values of it and the praxis of it. And then it was kind of like, oh, this is the political, you know what I mean, lens that's undergirding how I've been taught how to move as an organizer, as a, you know, person, a human, you know, trying to be in right relationship with the world. And so when I think about, Charlene was telling me a conversation she'd had with Barbara. And Barbara was saying that, you know, she said when we wrote, Barbara Smith, sorry friends, Barbara Smith, one of the one of the founders of the Combahee River Collective. And she was saying that, you know, in her read, and this was, you know, within the last year or two in which they had this conversation, that often what it seemed like is that we, you know, dropped the politics and only went with the identity. And many elders have, you know, said to me, Suzanne Farr, one of the founders of Song, was like, there was a moment in movement where, you know, they were trying to make it real clear that it wasn't, to your point, it wasn't just about, you know, your individual, how many labels can I put on myself, you know, but it was also about being able to understand the conditions of our lives, make assessments of the condition of your life, how it connects to other folk, And then it helps inform the strategy that we use to dismantle the systems that is tearing us all apart, you know? And somehow, you know, their read was that that sort of process has gotten lost in the sauce. And so these questions, or like this situation where folks is like, you know, I'm a lesbian, so that automatically makes me, you know, anti-capitalist or abolition. It actually does not, friend.
It just say
And
we
we know
know
that. Yeah. And you know, and we know this to be true, but I think that's part of our ongoing work. And which is why inside of song, one of the questions that we would always raise and consistently raise, I raise it to myself, is always, are you willing to be transformed in the service of the work? You know, because that there, I think gives us an invitation, because we know it's not just about transforming systems, but part of this work is to transform ourselves. You know what I mean? To sharpen our praxis, to sharpen the way in which we be in right relationship with each other, how we, you know, embody the values of, you know, everyone has dignity and everyone can, you know, make meaningful contribution and, you know, all the things. And so, yeah, I just wanted to add that piece. I think it's important, especially for those, you know, Barbara Smith, who, one of the folks who wrote it, in like their read of like, ooh, weren't saying that, friends, you know, as a way to course correct, for ourselves.
Thank you for saying that. Like something like that I experience, you know, like in the movement work, like that I have, like I'm honored to be a part of in New Orleans around housing justice, HIV justice, is the challenges of like sitting and being in the Black queer feminist as simultaneous things. And I think someone over here like spoke to that, like those who taught me, and what I say is that like it is simultaneously a political framework. And when I say a political framework, I mean how power is arranged. That to me is the purpose of a political framework, to have a way of talking about the power that exists, who has it, types of it, ways to build more of it. But it's also an organizing strategy. So a Black queer feminist lens is a way that we base build.
Yep.
It is a lens in which informs who we're reaching out to, right? And it is a daily practice. Not about policing how you move, and what we say should be in alignment with how we in fact move. We are not preachers and Pharisees in the Bible who said, do as I say, not as I do. No. Weird. So weird. And a part of that organizing strategy, I believe Black queer feminism is also, or could be, a legal strategy. I have based my entire law practice on Black queer feminism as a legal strategy, and I would love to talk more about that, you know, in this space. But
Say more about that.
oh, now we're going to, okay.
I'm curious too, because
Okay.
when I saw that they like have some questions for us, and I was like, ooh, I want to hear more about how folks are grappling with this, you know, to embody the politic in this. And some folks in that previous session was like, you know, the contradiction of working in the legal system, you know.
Well,
So I'm curious,
so
you know, we got to read.
there are contradictions, yes, because systems are contradictions. Like I pay taxes because I'm not trying to live off the grid in that way. I respect the people who do, and I pay the taxes because that's not a decision that I've made. And I'm doing all these other things that I believe are undermining that. Like there are contradictions. So I hear that. And sometimes as somebody who, again, is blessed to organize in the place where I'm from, those kind of frameworks of lawyer over here and organizing over there aren't meeting how the fuck I show up.
Yeah.
Because when I show up as a lawyer, you knew my mother, you knew my grandmother, you know my brother who's a hood nigga from around the block. That's a different kind of accountability. And sometimes like these kind of frameworks of lawyer over here, organizer, it assumes you are not in the, like you are not from the communities that you're working within in ways that is definitely true for some and is not true for all of us. And so sometimes I respect that framework, and it's just not my lived reality. So I think I kind of like push back with like that kind of like of dichotomy. Also, it'll be 10 years since I finished law school. I have almost 20 years of organizing experience like that predate me as a lawyer that didn't just stop on, what was it, August 09, like when I entered law school. Yes, it shifted because I was in school, but it didn't stop. And it didn't like reset when I finished. Like it again, it morphed. So that's just something that is just a difference sometimes, like when we talk about. But as far as a legal strategy, so to me, lawyering is a tool. It is not a career in and of itself. It is a tool, much like I learned base building, much like I learned how to hold space on street corners and do harm reduction and hand out, you know, like safer sex and needles. Those are tools. To me, at best, lawyering is that. I say that not to minimize. I think it's important to be clear what it is, because if we're not clear, I think that's sometimes part of how we get fucked up. Ego gets in the way of, I spent all this time, you know, so I should be in this space. Okay, and that's just a weird way to enter, you know, rooms. So like, to me, like that's what I say, it's a legal strategy, a tool, but also it's this Latin term, partus sequitur ventrum. Have folks heard that? It's a legal doctrine like that goes back 17th century US colonies, very early. It means all children inherit the legal status of the mother. It translates to slavery follows the womb. That is why, like, there is not legal work that happens in the US that is not based on partus sequitur ventrum. Every legal theory is based on like that idea. Property, criminal law, family law. You know what I mean? So like that to me is why it's important that Black queer feminism be a legal strategy, because our law is literally based on partus sequitur ventrum. You know, anytime there's a federal court sentencing for Telly Hankton in New Orleans, allegedly one of the biggest drug pens, in his 35-minute sentencing, 25 minutes of that is the judge lecturing his mother. That's partus sequitur ventrum, like this idea that Black wombs are capital and are responsible for the ills of society. Like that to me is why, you know, it's not just, like it's a central way to see and like to kind of uncover, and I'm not talking uncover like 6 feet. That 2 inches it can uncover makes a big difference in a legal strategy. Turning it a little bit to the side, again, not a 360, maybe I don't know math, 5-degree turn. That's a small turn, yeah. It can open up so many possibilities.
I'm curious.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm like I'd like to hear from folks. How does this show up in your work, your politic and praxis of Black queer feminisms? How does this show up in the ways in which you're practicing, learning, lawyering? Also, ain't nobody practicing it? Y'all just in these streets wilding? Okay, let's touch some sky, friends.
Hi, this is kind of a question comment. I'm Ashley Carter, and I was practicing as a lawyer, and I've started, I'm like nervous to say this. Now I'm working in philanthropy, but I'm trying to bring everything that I've learned and what have become my values through movement lawyering, because I was working for Advancement Project before this and as a public defender before that. And so I think that for me, it's just trying to make sure that anything we do is not harmful to the politic, and that those values are informing the decision making that happens. So that's kind of how I've been thinking about it.
Thank you. I saw your hand, yeah?
So I work in legal aid, and so the way that I try to bring the framework is in which cases I can choose. You have to have that lens because we can't help everybody. So the cases I pick, I make sure that I'm analyzing, trying to use a Black queer feminist lens. And, oftentimes my clients are Black single mothers, and they are being regulated because of their reproductive choices. And that happens all the time. And so those are, they're my highest priority. They're my highest priority cases because, and you have to bring that lens also to the briefing. You have to say it to the judge. This woman is experiencing this because the patriarchy is making their judgments against her. And so I try to put that in writing for every judge because, don't let it say I let that get swept away or I tried to ignore that. So those are the two ways I try to deal with it.
I've never heard anybody on a little law show say that remark.
So I work in impact litigation, and similarly, for me, Black queer feminism is much more aspirational than I'd like it to be. We have a lot of problems, I think, in terms of how impact litigation is much more focused on, what do lawyers think and what do lawyers want, than on what do communities need and what do the directly impacted people need from lawyers and ask of lawyers to do. So that's something in my work I try to be making sure that whenever we have a substantive decision to make, or if we're making a decision about what cases to bring, it's something that's actually responsive to a need from a community rather than just lawyers thinking this is another case that will catch headlines or whatever it is. And that's challenging. I really don't think that we're doing that intentionally. I'm hoping that we can, as impact litigators, as lawyers generally, really commit ourselves to principles of being responsive to and accountable to communities and the directly impacted people who are dealing with the issues that we're fighting. But I think we have a long way to go. But I think in my organizing work, it's easier to do that. And it usually just looks like, everything that we're doing, always trying to be moving with people who are directly impacted by the issues that we're talking about, and making sure that decisions are being made by those people, not just by the people who, are more likely to have the privilege and the power, but instead that we're actually trying to transfer the power from the privilege and the elite to the people who are impacted by the issues that we're working with.
Thank you for saying that. And I just want to add, as somebody who also does impact litigation, it doesn't have to be. I can name cases that I'm still enrolled in where some like that, like I was the only attorney who brought the case, some where I was a part of teams that I can say brought a Black queer feminist lens. So I agree that it's not, I would say probably it's not the norm, but I also want to say it's not aspirational in the sense like people are doing it, like having conversations with the team of no. This 16-year-old girl who was protesting after the murder of Alton Sterling, she deserves to be a lead plaintiff. She wants to be lead plaintiff. Her story, like how she experienced this protest and the resulting law enforcement violence actually needs to be centered. We've, in these other cases, have centered these Black cishet men, which no one's arguing against that, because again, it's not an either or. It's not us versus them. We're family. I'm getting free. I'm bringing my brothers with me, as much as I can. So it's not an either or. And this case is centering what it means to be a 16-year-old Black girl in Baton Rouge protesting for the first time and being targeted in that way. So I also want to offer that, again, it's not a norm. It requires some uncomfortable conversation sometimes, but it is possible to bring that lens. And when I say bring that lens, nowhere in the complaint does it say Black queer feminism. I want to be clear, it's not always this explicit thing, right? but the lens of talking about Black children, talking about Black families, talking about a Black girl as a Black girl and not as a woman, because our childhoods are often taken away, that is Black queer feminism. So just like offering that, like it looks all kinds of ways, you know, and it's possible. And you know, it is long-term sometimes, but I think you had your hand up. Oh, you have a mic?
I got it. I love what you just said. I am not a practicing lawyer or a lawyer, period. But I think something that I think about so often and see with lawyers often and just in movement spaces in general is just, and what I hold within this, within an identity and as a practice and as a politic, is the importance of relationship building. So not only, I heard this really beautiful definition of movement lawyering yesterday that was like, okay, a movement lawyer means you're for the movement. You do whatever the movement needs. If it means take care of someone's kid in that moment, you're taking care of the kid. If it means showing up and sweeping something, it means that's what you're doing. And so I really like that definition in some ways of movement lawyering. And I love being able to hear what y'all do with those legal frameworks. I think too, the importance of relationship building. And yeah, my freedom isn't going to come until everyone else is free. And I think about that a lot within the relationship building. Okay, if I'm saying I'm for the people, do I know the people, as everyone has talked about here? And then I also think about the importance of knowing and learning how to navigate conflict. Conflict being between each other, because it shows up. If we don't know how to navigate conflict and love each other deeply, then are we actually practicing Black queer feminism? Are we living it? Are we embracing it, whether it's in our wage work or beyond? And so I think thinking about that, how are we navigating conflict, shows us a lot too, how we're loving.
I wanted to add to the point of minimizing the legal profession. That's something I actively try to do in any and all spaces. And I think a part of that for me was realizing that like a lawyer is not like your identity. Like it's not even a real job, like get a real job. It's like, and once I like stepped aside from that and was just like, oh, like, so you're not like, I don't know, just like getting out of my head and being like, oh, this is not what they told you in law school it was. So like actively trying to like minimize the need and necessity for lawyers. What that looks like for me sometimes is making sure that information that I got in law school is not just corralled up in the ivory tower. So like I represent babies and so, or babies, teenagers. And I love when like my clients are like able to tell me what amount of drugs are not a felony anymore. It's just like they're talking to their friends, like, okay, this is how we got to move, you know? And I'm just like, this is perfect. This is great. Like that is how that should work. And so just, I'm just saying that because I remember when you spoke, you were like, not to minimize like the legal profession. I'm just like, no, I actively try to minimize the legal profession because yeah, it's not that deep.
So I think there are two things. Thank you for the space. I also appreciate y'all for having this space. There are two things that I think about a lot in. Hold your microphone. Oh, sorry. Yes, there are two things that I think about a lot that I try to work on reflecting in my legal practice. And the first one is about time and distribution of time. And one of the first things that I noticed when I started practicing in like with litigation or whatever, is how few Black clients we would get in like the plaintiff side employment firm I was working at. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Black women, Black queer folks, Black gender expansive folks are having lots of employment issues. What the fuck is going on here, right? And so then I started pulling in my own clients, and I came to realize that the first conversation with somebody who has experienced so many levels of trauma at the hands of the system that we live in is not going to just talk about what's going on in a way that would make a good complaint that would be successful, right? And so spending a lot of time, I spend so much time talking with folks to ensure that, their stories are told in the ways that they feel comfortable with. And like, I have met so few lawyers who actually do that. And so
spending, because it's not efficient. It's not, and so pushing against that capitalist urge to, be super efficient, to bring the most cases, to bring the most effective cases, because sometimes it's also really valuable just to talk somebody through their story and like be present. And so in that way, I try to be like a community member and push back against this like force of urgency that is, a part of the capitalist system that has rendered the need for Black queer feminism as a framework in the first place. And then the second thing is about I do civil rights work. I work at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. I don't consider the work that I do civil rights work. I consider it Black liberation work, but we do civil rights cases. And I think decommodifying the tools that we're using, like I'll do a personal injury case if it's going to move resources into somebody else, into a Black person's life, a person who's impacted by these systems. Like, I do not care. It doesn't have to be a special constitutional thing. It doesn't have to be, something that's some super cool new novel legal theory. Fuck that. What is shifting the material circumstances of the most marginalized folks that you're living in community with? And so those are the ways that I think about my personal lawyering. And I have like learned from a lot of folks who do it really well, like Mandisa, and who have been doing it for a very long time. So yeah, that's what I do. And I have learned from a lot of folks.
All right, Denise.
Hi, Myra.
I love all that Annika just said. And it made me think about a couple of things. So I'm working on a project to document sexual harm by cops in the South. And I think, so like my first thought is where this is useful to, like, this lens shapes how I think about goals. And so for me, my goals are twofold. Thank you. One, that it feels like I think what people have been saying in different ways, that it feels morally necessary to whatever comes from it in terms of our organizing outcomes. It just feels morally necessary to put resources around how children, like specifically Black children, Black women, Black queer people, children, queer people of color in the South experience policing in non-fatal ways every single day. And so that's like an animating goal for doing this documentation work. But the second is like, I feel like, yes, I would love to see legal organizations take on specific types of clients or prioritize certain types of clients, but I'm also interested in seeing how they like shift what they say is the purpose of the state. Because sometimes people will say like, cops kill girls too, right? But I'm like, how do we get to saying that like policing's core function is sexual harm, policing's core function is gender-based harm? Like, it's not just like one of the things that happens by accident, but it is the core purpose. And so that's been really helpful in terms of like, how does this lens shape how we talk about what the state's purpose is? The second thing I was thinking about is just like on how do I like trouble the assumptions? Like, how do I trouble time, to what Annika was saying, and our practices? So I grew up in survivor work. And so I have a visceral personal experience of just like being like the assumption that storytelling is always good. I don't believe it, because I've seen storytelling, including in legal work, just be extractive, or to like not take the time to support people to have like a community infrastructure before they come forward. And so while we're doing this documentation work, I'm running into like real serious ethical questions. I'm trying to figure out how to find community to help me think through is like, when should lawyers ask people to come forward? What is the time and like infrastructure that should be set up before you ask someone to tell their story?
Yes.
What are the formats that like people, and and like while respecting people's choice, autonomy, agency, like how do we slow ourselves down and put in work to support people before we ask them to tell stories? Because I think there's just like a rush to tell stories or extract stories. And I think the process of doing it doesn't treat people well, but also like then those stories are out and then they're dealing with retaliation, they're dealing with the consequences of having information out there. And I'm not sure that we have like the infrastructure in place to like support people as they navigate retaliation. So those are some of the things I'm thinking about, is like, how do we slow ourselves down? How do we trouble storytelling, or at least trouble it enough to do it better in a daily practice?
Thank you for saying that about the narrative and pushing back. It reminded me of what was in my notes, but I have horrible handwriting, so couldn't read it. So it just was there. Like part of like the Black queer feminist lens to me is really pushing back on these ideas that I know we hear of good plaintiffs. Thinking back to AR, it was so much pushback in the team, like because she is a minor. And so it mean that her mom would have to bring the case until she was 18. I was like, fuck yes, because part of the narrative is these irresponsible Black women as mothers, you know, because folks like, oh, well, who sends her child to a protest? She did. And what? And what? She was working, dropped her child off. I'm coming back to get you. Her child was arrested in that time period. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about how patriarchal violence is law enforcement violence. So just also expand like this idea and like really challenging these like white supremacists, and respectable narratives of good plaintiffs. And I know there's some tech issues, just highlighting Andrea Ritchie, who has inspired me in the ways that I've seen her for decades now do exactly that. And then
I appreciate everything that everyone's saying, and I feel like very just seen by a lot of the things that people are saying, and it just inspired me to say that, like, I think the way that like Black queer feminism comes into my work is just letting it be okay to be passionate about the people that you work with and love them, and remove the abstraction that the law gives. And I remember when I first started working, I felt wrong for you know, caring about all the things that my clients were going through, or trying to say the types of things that I knew were important to my client in emotion. And then I realized that it's obviously part of the design, and everywhere and everything that I try to do, I try to make it okay to care deeply about the people that I'm working with, and make it extremely obvious that I care deeply for them, and tell everybody that I care deeply and I'm not objective. And I know that the system, and I say that to them, and I say that to the people that I work with, and I say it constantly, because I do feel like not only does the system want me to abstract them and make them an object, but they want me to be abstracted as well, because I am a Black queer woman and I'm working with you, but you don't want me to be that either as I'm representing you. And you don't want us to have that connection with each other. And you don't want us to have the power that comes together when we work together and we fight together and we find solutions, whether it's in the court or it's outside of court or it's anything else. And I realize when I tap into how much I feel, and I let people see how much I feel, whether it's good and it's bad, or I'm crying. I've cried in front of my clients before. And I remember when I first started working, I felt like a terrible lawyer. I was like, I'm so bad. I'm a bad lawyer. But no. And I realized, especially the folks that I'm working with, they appreciate that, and we can cry together and it's fine. And I think that allowing them to be people and allowing myself to be a person allows us both to tap into how we really connect and what we can do together. And that's like what I'm hearing about, the not caring about the time, not caring about what we're saying. Like, fuck the system, fuck everything, fuck all of that. Like, we are real, you're real. What are you going through? Like, how can we work with each other, and not letting people tell you that you're bad or you're wrong or it's not good or you need to be objective or you need to not have these ideas in order to be a good representative for somebody is just like, and I just feel inspired because I feel like everyone is doing that, and it feels good to see that we're doing that and like we're growing.
Thank you. I saw you here, friend, and then Tanetta. And if there isn't anyone else on stack, I know we're supposed to end at like 11:30 or something. 12? Okay, great. Okay, so if it's not until 12, then we'll keep going. I have some thoughts. Yes. So our friend here with the mic.
Oh, you had your mic first if you want to go ahead. Yeah.
I actually have a question. My name is Tynetta. My pronouns are they, she. Is it okay if I ask this question? I gotta ask for consent first. It's a long one. How do you all define Black queer feminism? And how do you recommend others, especially those in fields that can be potentially an advancement of white supremacy and colonial structures, create their definition and guiding praxis through Black queer feminism? And is Black queer feminism inherently abolitionist, transnational, anti-capitalist, etc.? And how can it be those things if it is not?
I'm gonna go ahead and address this one. Friend, I'm sorry. You came in a few minutes late and we did that first one.
Okay.
Sorry, friend. And so for the sake of time, we do want to keep it moving. But to that other point though, is it inherently anti-capitalist? Is it inherently? And
Abolition.
to that, I would say, of course, yes, indeed. That's what I understand. And I don't see, I think that part of our work is to continue to illuminate that, because for some reason I see like sometimes it's like there seems like there's a separation, or as if that lens, and thank BYP 100, I believe, have gave movement that language around Black queer feminist lens, Asha, Fresco, a lot of the comrades inside of there. But I think it's like I'm like, it's you got the lens, now just take it further, apply it to all the systems. And if you do that, it's like a math, it's almost like this is what will ultimately, it has to come out in the wash as something that's anti-capitalist. I think what we're still grappling with though is what's on the other side of that. One might say socialism, one might say, and perhaps there's something else that must be emerged, as we're thinking about economic systems, et cetera. But I think that as long as we continue to apply the lens to the systems that we're trying to address, to change, to dismantle, to build, I think there's no question, and sometimes I think it just requires us to walk it out a little bit more. But yeah.
Thank you.
There is something that I wanted to raise with this crew, and no one may have an answer right now, but in my mind, I'm like, I'm in a room full of all of these lawyers, okay? So I have to ask this, question. And I had the blessing of sitting in this week with Freedom Community Center here in St. Louis. And one of the things, I was in a conversation with somebody, and we found, we came up against this in some of the work in Atlanta, but when we would, in this quest to engage in restorative justice. And once the police and the folks have already got the case, he's running went to jail already. The question that we've been grappling with is, how do you get the state to take no interest when the state has said that someone is a danger? But you like, actually, because of our analysis, because we understand what time it is, all we're like, actually, no. And we actually want to give us our people back. Give us our people back. And so I'm curious about the ways in which, again, folks may not have a whatever about it, but I think it's something that I would like for folks to be thinking about, is how we actually, don't even have to go down that road of due process that the court says that they're going to offer, when we're like, we actually have our own process, and where can we nip it in the bud? And even if the person who has, experienced harm in that particular moment of crisis or what have you, are like, yeah, I'm cool, forgiveness, restored, cool. But it seems like the state continues to make an argument that generally the public is afraid of you. The public is afraid of you. And so in my mind, I'm like, I have some thoughts about it, but I'd be curious from a legal lens, is there ways of getting around that? And I also add to something in that dynamic too. There's also like, we've heard people say like, I don't want to be caught up for witness tampering, or I can't talk to such and such. So it feels like in a lot of ways, even the methods that folks are using to try to skirt the system, being inside of our abolitionist politic, that the state has done a really good job of binding our hands. So I'd be curious about how folks are thinking about that.
Yeah, this is a question that my whole job at Detroit Justice Center is the co-coordination, because I also co-founded, co-lead with, and I always name them, Belinda, Tashmika, Carrie, and Barbara, who helped me co-lead that space, the Metro Detroit Restorative Justice Network. And what we have found is that it's many things at the same time, and it requires a lot of creativity. We have a prosecutor's office that's trash, and a prosecutor that's absolutely trash, and will not entertain restorative justice for adults who do violent harm. So the way that we have tried to be creative about this is there are a number of offensive fronts that we are working on. So one is, and I was just talking about this, I was just in Chicago last week learning about their recent legislation evidentiary privilege that is now afforded to all restorative justice in the state, including the restorative justice that's happening at the rec center in the basement of the church. I mean, it cannot be entered into the court. The fact that the circle took place cannot be entered because confidentiality is not enough. We haven't signed them little flimsy, confidentiality, but someone could say, hey, listen, we had this circle, but then he told me that he was selling drugs. I didn't know that, and then they go down, tell the police. In Chicago, in the state of Illinois, that it's protected, it's privileged. So we're realizing we need that because ain't nobody coming to the circle if facilitator ain't coming if they can be called as a witness. And defense counsel is like, hell no, I'm not putting my client in a circle, because it's about accountability. You're literally admitting that you have done harm. So those are barriers, but what we're finding is what we can do is work with cases that are in the system in a particular window, sort of post-adjudication, and maybe pre-sentencing. And what we've done is I've done our restorative justice 101 for the social workers at the public defender's office. So it's on their radar. And so when cases come across their desk, they're like, oh, I think this might be a good case. They reach out to us and say, hey, we have a case every day, all day. We got domestic violence case. They still living with each other. She does not want him to go to prison. So-and-so's brother was killed in a hit and run, but it was a young man and he really feels terrible about this and they want this. So what we're doing is, because we're abolitionists, prosecutor office, they hate us, but we're forcing them to hear victims and survivors and their advocates every day, all day. So yes, they said no to the first one, but now you got to say no 100 times a year. So I think for us, we're trying to press them from many different, politically, legislatively, but also just literally having people say to the prosecutors and their victim advocates and their social workers, I don't want this person to go to prison. And there is this thing that I've been made aware of called restorative justice, and I want this instead. And it's a lot of no's, but that's been our strategy is, okay, then let the prosecutor keep saying that they're working for victims and keep telling victims no to what they say they want. But it's a long game and it has a lot of organization and really just getting out in front of people in the community and saying there's another way that we can do this. But I'll say too, is that we have to build up our community's capacity to hold these cases, and not just the cases, but the before care and the after care. Who gonna follow up with the agreement if she says, listen, I want you to go to the anger management, I need you to be in therapy, blah, blah, blah. Who's accountable? He ain't got a car. How he getting there? You know what I'm saying? He ain't got no money. Therapy costs money. So there's a whole other, it's not just the sort of legal strategy, but there's really a deep community sort of network of care and accountability that infrastructure also has to be in place for this to really work for the people.
Ooh, yes. Just building on that, one of the things that, because I've seen it happen in New Orleans where, and thinking of the earlier conversation of not winning or losing, thinking of the ways that it built or did not build power. I've seen these build power, and I've also seen them actually do the opposite and actually increase the arm of the state. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I saw that made the difference is the people and the trust building. I think what is also really challenging about being a lawyer is meeting somebody. I'm trying to do a lot of relationship building. And that's challenging because of these arbitrary timelines that are often out of our control. And in these processes, I noticed the ones that were powerful were the ones where people fuck with each other. And again, sometimes I wonder if it is contextual in terms of New Orleans being such a small city, being a big town really, being that it is very neighborhood based. That made it easier, again, in New Orleans to do that. Not sure if that'd be applicable in other places, but because the Black people, us who are from there, generally know everybody in the neighborhood. So it meant that, when it was time to do like what I call a front back strategy, front of the house moves one way, back of the house is moving this, and it's clear. People know their roles, people have their roles. That's an ego thing, because most of the lawyers who were pulled in weren't doing shit other than flanking, and that's important. It was also a chance to flip respectability and have that one person who everyone fucks with because they're a good Negro, have them come and write the letter, come on sentencing day and support. So like don't do anything else, sir. This is your one job. May 10th, 9 o'clock, show up. This is a good person, which is language that everybody hates. And the judge is like, let's move forward. But as far as the restorative, of before it gets there, that's where I saw some power sometimes be built. And it required us to have some introspective and hard conversations, because it's something about patriarchal violence, particularly intimate partner violence, that I think really stretches our abolitionist lens, because, and I'll be clear, I'm somebody who's a race traitor, because I'm like, I don't give a fuck what's happening. It's not okay for you to hit people. It's like that is not acceptable. I don't care the levels of racial trauma you believe somehow only you are dealing with, as if we also are not the people who are surviving the violence too. But it's something about that in particular that I think stretches, but being clear that just because we've agreed to not move in this way, it does not give a pass. And so holding all of the lines of, no, we're not doing that, and this is unacceptable, and not punitive, but there are consequences. So all that to say, fleshing out and being very clear in your group and your team, punitive punishment is different than consequences. You will face consequences if you decide you will keep assaulting people. They could be public, they could be private, all of the above, but you will face consequences. Like having clarity in the group of what that means. And not being liberal, because oftentimes, how it is, with identity shit. Oh, but this is a Black cishet man who was incarcerated. This is a, XYZ person. Therefore, I don't give a fuck. No one gets a pass to harm. We're not doing that. And that to me is a Black queer feminist lens saying we are all accountable. We will all, have consequences, and it doesn't have to happen in this state kind of way. But I think someone had their hand up.
Yeah.
Thank you. One thing I just wanted to know too is I'm not practicing anymore, but when I was in a public defense office, I had so many young Black people that were assigned male at birth that didn't understand themselves as having able to be harmed. And so teaching a lot of these young Black queer men, oftentimes, the language of harm for their own bodies was something that you don't learn in law school, right? You go in and you learn this is transactional. You may have committed this crime, you may not have, but I'm supposed to defend you, hopefully in the motions, so we don't go to court, but definitely at court. But then trying to teach folks and teach some of these youth what it means to have been harmed, and that not necessarily meaning you have to have had trauma, right? That you have to be disabled in a way by this harm, and therefore that's the proof of it. So what does it mean to have relationship to your body? Understand that you're in a court, in a system that is already kind of pre-imagined for you, right? So yes, you did this thing, but what happened to you? How did you get here? How do you go from here, right? And look at who else is in this courtroom. Look at who else is behind bars. So part of it was understanding that this is both a legal transaction, but also a spiritual and therapy session. And how do I now learn more about my Black queer self and how I show up with this young Black queer person or trans person here? And not to talk to myself, I know we're short on time, but I had this one client that was a trans Black woman in DC, and she was essentially arrested because she was supposedly doing sex work. She was really walking home from a waiting job. But right, and so she kind of took a lot of that guilt on. It was like, oh, I shouldn't have been wearing this. I was out at this time. I knew better. But baby, your body was just sexualized by the police. So can we talk about how you were just captivated by somebody else's eye, and now your lack of desire to engage with them sexually has landed you in a courtroom? Let's talk about that part. Right. So I had learned that wow, so what does this mean about my body when I show up in the courtroom? How does what I wear, how I speak, the butterfly earrings that I have in affect the way my client thinks they're able to show up and tell their story? So I had to think about my body as a mirror to what their body could do. And that changed my complete practice. And it's why I'm in academia now, not that.
Yeah, I also want to add to this conversation too. I want to bring Derica Purnell into this conversation about harm. And I don't think I have any solutions or answers right now, but I think one of the questions that she posits is, why do people harm? And I think you really get into that. Like, I feel like we need to have like these kinds of conversations, right? Of like, what is actually happening within our communities that need to be addressed, that aren't being addressed, like more systemic things. And then this is how Black queer feminism comes into this, right? Like, how do we reimagine systems and ways of being in community with one another so that these harms don't actually happen in the ways that we see them happening. I work with teens or work alongside teens in Pittsburgh, and a lot of the times, like some of the students who talk about restorative justice practices happening in their schools, our Black teens are like, this actually supports or actually benefits the white students more than anyone else. And so sitting with them and actually hearing how they want to reimagine how to address harms and stuff is really like enlightening and important, because at the end of the day, like they're the ones being impacted by that harm. And so they're the ones who should be coming up with those solutions, right? And so if we're thinking about harm in terms of like the bigger community and things like that, like I think we can definitely look towards formerly incarcerated people, currently incarcerated people. We can look to people and organizations like Live Free, who work alongside formerly incarcerated folk in creating these kinds of solutions and ideas of what do we do actually about harm, and like how do we address it in a way that's more that actually serves our communities and stuff. So that's why I just wanted to add to this conversation. Thank you.
The only thing I would really add to like this amazing conversation is just the fact that like what you were saying just now in terms of like when you know like someone's like going through the system, they don't the thought isn't necessarily like how did I get here, like what led me to this moment, but like it's just like, okay, like how can I get out of this situation, like how can I like get out of like how can I like prevent myself from like becoming like incarcerated and like other things like that, which is all like important. But I think like part of the reason why we don't like people don't automatically like think about that is just because of the establishment of like accountability, and how like the court system itself does not invite people to like take accountability, or like invite like the people who are like making the arrest to like take accountability for like their wrongdoing as well. And like I think part of having like a Black queer feminist lens is like having that accountability like taken in, and also like people like in legal spaces like as lawyers like thinking imaginatively about how to like use the law in a different way to like flip the switch and like have that accountability, and like have like what you were saying, that sort of like emotional support work, and on top of like trying to like help people navigate through the system and stuff. So
and that, thank y'all. Like whew, so many thoughts. This is definitely not the end of the conversation. And we've been told that tech is working. And so we were hoping to close with Andrea, who I keep not,
Can y'all hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You can hear me? Oh my God.
Yes!
No, we can't have this big picture of me on the screen. So I'm gonna put up here to like introduce myself.
You look so good.
Oh, thank you, sweets. I'm wearing my Mariam Kaba, Let This Radicalize You and Not Lead You to Despair t-shirt. So that's all I want to show you. I'm gonna introduce myself and then I'm like, get off screen and keep talking. So I'm Andrea. I go by she. I'm fine with any pronouns. I am a Black lesbian immigrant survivor of state and interpersonal violence. And I'm a Black queer feminist abolitionist, and have been incredibly privileged to listen to this beautiful, rich, deep generative, challenging conversation among all y'all. This has been the way I've approached the work over the past 30 years, and I've learned so much in this conversation from so many of you who are also my teachers, including Mary Hooks and Mandisa. So just want to shout them out for holding this conversation so beautifully. And now I'm gonna turn my camera off because it's freaking me out. All right. But what you see on the screen is the cover of a book that I co-authored with Mariam Kaba, who I co-founded Interrupting Criminalization with, as an organization that challenges issues of state violence, gender-based violence, and criminalization through a Black queer feminist lens. And so it just feels really affirming to hear all the ways that you all have described challenging multiple forms of violence through the Black queer feminist lens. I wanted to pick up on just a few things from the conversation. One, the piece, the emphasis that a few of you have made on the queer part and why that's important. And I wanted to say, to lift up the work of Kathy Cohen, who taught me in Dyke's Bulldaggers and Welfare Queens, or Punk's Bulldaggers and Welfare Queens, about how queer requires us to recognize that womanhood, manhood, and normative sexuality are defined under racial capitalism by the exclusion of Black people. And so all Black people are queered by white supremacy, just like, as TL Lewis has taught me, all Black people are disabled by white supremacy, and that requires us to really queer our resistance and not try and force ourselves into the structures that weren't created for us, which obviously is the legal system, but also just generally cis heteropatriarchy, heteronormativity, and racial capitalism. So it requires us to really build new worlds that honor and celebrate and nurture us in all of our multiplicities. Many of y'all in the room are part of BOLD, Black Organizing for Leadership and Dignity. And my BOLD commitment is simply to a world where Black women, girls, queer and trans people can freely love and be fully loved. And that requires tearing all of that down in ways that are queer, that resist all of the interlocking systems of oppression. So I just wanted to really lift up folks who were saying the queer part of the Black queer feminist lens is really important, both in understanding how the interlocking systems of oppression operate, but also in how we resist. And I really learned that from some clients in New Orleans too, in terms of how that plays out in practice, to the question of like, how do we practice from that place? It's a much longer and more beautiful story that probably is best told by women with a vision, but I had the privilege of representing folks in New Orleans who are being criminalized for engaging in sex work in particular ways. And the law that we were challenging was targeting and being used particularly against Black women, Black trans folks, and Black gay men. And, you know, one of our clients really articulated Kathy Cohen's theory in talking about how this law was being used by simply saying, we all queer out here. Like, all of our sexuality and our gender and our presence is being queered by the state and how this law is enforced. And that's why we're joining together and resisting it. And that's just one sort of very brief way of describing how we can practice law through that lens. The other piece I just wanted to pick up is about Black queer feminism having to be anti-capitalist. The Combahee River Statement Collective says really clearly, our freedom would necessitate the destruction of all systems of oppression. That includes racial capitalism. So I don't understand any way to be a Black queer feminist without being anti-capitalist. But it also calls on us, and I think this was posed in a question, but I don't know that we talked a lot about it. It requires us to be internationalist and anti-imperialist. As June Jordan, whose birthday we celebrated last week, and Audre Lorde remind us, that as long as Black women, queer and trans people are oppressed anywhere, we still have work to do. And as Robin pointed out this morning, we can't organize here in ways that might redistribute wealth here that is extracted from the global South, that leaves Black women, queer, and trans people elsewhere still suffering the interlocking systems of oppression. So I think those are the things that I just wanted to pick up from the thread of the conversation, but I just mostly was taking furious notes and learning from all y'all. The last thing I want to share is that the piece about the ways in which the state comes, the question that Mary posed, the ways in which the state comes for the ways in which we are trying to build other worlds within the current one, including community-based safety strategies, and just to lift up that law for Black lives and interrupting criminalization, and law professors, law students have collaborated to create a legal guide that, or resource that basically is about figuring out how to protect our people in those situations so that we know what the risks are, how the state will come for those things, and how to protect them in the ways that folks already described in Illinois. So I feel like that's the job of a Black queer feminist movement lawyer, is to protect and defend to the death the things that we need to enact a Black feminist praxis of collective care, and to do that by sharing information and then strategizing around how to protect those experiments so they can grow to challenge the system that is. So I'm just grateful to y'all for listening through the tech issues, giving me a few minutes to share just some reflections, and mostly just my deepest gratitude to all y'all for this conversation, and particularly to Mary and Mandisa for holding it and for the invitation to be part of it.
So that's Andrea Ritchie, y'all. Sorry.
Well, we got 5 more minutes, and so y'all know we could probably sit in this and go down a rabbit hole and have several more conversations. But I think what could be just a helpful offering as we close this session out, if there are lingering questions that folks have, or Marbury put an offering up, was it during lunch? I believe there's some papers where folks can like organize themselves to be engaged in combos. If folks are already like, friends, let's come jam out, I would love for folks to make those offering in the space and begin to, organize around, the shit that's on your heart, friends. Do folks have things they want to share and invite people into? You?
Okay, not really like necessarily creating space, but I had a question. So you can come find me in the street if you want, and just like answer it for me. Basically, kind of what you raised, talking about what you didn't learn in law school. And we're talking about Black queer feminist lens and things like that. So if you did learn something about Black queer feminist lens or whatever in school, find me in the street, tell me what was that. And then the second thing was, and where you found it at. And then the second thing is what you didn't learn, how, like, what would, I forgot. Okay, basically, how would you want that to be incorporated? Or do you think it should be, or should we gatekeep it for the homies? See, that's pretty much it. Also, disclaimer, I'm in undergrad, so I'm just out here just trying to survive. So if you could just help me out with that, that'd be great.
Yep. I'll pass it back too. Just real quick, I just want to announce, so I teach law right now, teach constitutional and criminal law, but I just created the Center for the Study of Black Life in the Law in Minneapolis and Mitchell Hamlin. So if anybody trying to be down, we're looking for affiliated scholars, senior fellows. We're launching officially in February, so I definitely want y'all to come speak. So hit me up, come find me. Let's do the work together, y'all.
All right.
Yeah, I am not a lawyer. I'm an organizer, or I'm an aspiring organizer. But I always ask at the end, what is people's commitment? Like, so I would love to know, organizers' job are to agitate people, right? And I'm curious for people to leave this space asking themselves the internal question, what is my theory? What is my practice? And then what is my commitment to being in that theory and in that practice? I don't have anything to plug in, but that's what I want people to be thinking about when they leave any session that they participate in.
Hi, so part of my role as movement building director at If and How is to organize law students and lawyers. And we particularly do trainings for reproductive justice. But now, just as a result of this conversation, we're going to incorporate a queer Black feminism aspect into our trainings. And one of the visioning exercises we do is RJ Law School. So if we were to design a law school that was based around reproductive justice, it's what are the things that you would be learning? What are the things that you, because some of the work that we have to do is actively help law students and lawyers unlearn some of the harmful things that they learned in law school. And it's so clear how much of that is really needed more broadly than just thinking about the reproductive justice movement, but thinking about to your point, what to bring, like I want to bring this, into our trainings and thinking about, when we're thinking about the RJ Law School as a visioning exercise, bringing in a queer Black feminism aspect to that. And I would also, if people have other suggestions for things that we can incorporate in some of our trainings, what that could look like, because it's so clear how much more is needed in this space.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that this has been a very enriching conversation. Like, there are no strategy sessions. Last I checked, like we can make Black queer feminism one of the strategy sessions and continue to workshop and think through these kinds of ideas of how we can bring it back into our own practices and stuff.
Boom. All right, friends. I'm not going to hold you up. It's noon. I'm a little famished, to be honest. Where's the free lunch happening? Somebody put me on. But anywho, it's been delicious to be able to sit in circle with y'all and to hear your thoughts and to hear how folks are, trying to bring about the world that our people deserves and need, So thanks so much. Thanks so much.
This is dope. First of all, utmost respect since the moment I met Mary Hooks. So anytime I'm able to be in conversation, it's like you at our, this is what we do, just hanging out. So it's good to share that. Andrea is a 10-year plus mentor of mine. So it's just always an honor to be in space and just to talk with other people about things, is just an honor. I just feel so excited to be here. And the last thing I will say is we aren't going to always do it right, y'all. And I hope that our commitment to our people is greater than our own ego about the moments of when we fuck up. And I'm saying when, not because I'm anticipating that we will or wanting us to, but it's going to happen. We are building a world we've never fucking seen in many ways. So that's all I would just close with is like, let's just be clear that something happens, take accountability, be in the moment, do it again. And then again, and again, and again. Oh, sorry, yeah, thank y'all.